Hello everyone, my name is Amanda Giraldo, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. We're very excited to have everyone here and share our guide to launching a successful competitive mobile game. Today, our speaker, Evan James, Head of Product Marketing at Skillz, will be joining us again to talk about his insights on this topic. We'll go ahead and spend the first 40 minutes walking through the main content of the day, how to launch a successful competitive mobile game. Then we'll go into a 10-minute Q&A. A few things to note about this webinar. Please go ahead and mute yourself during this presentation to help with our audio quality. If you do encounter any audio problems during the presentation, try to refresh your browser and/or check your computer's audio settings. If you still are having issues, please feel free to notify us in the chat and we'll see how we can help you. If you have a question during the presentation, please feel free to ask on the chat at any time, and we'll be sure to answer those at the end. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded and distributed after in our follow-up, so you can review the materials later and share with others who also might be interested. All right, before we go ahead and get started, I'd like to start with a quick poll to see how many people here have a competitive mobile game and are thinking about turning it into an e-sport. I'll give you a few minutes to participate here. All right, great. Looks like we have varying levels of people who do have a competitive game and are looking to transform it into an e-sport. So that's great. This will give you a lot of insight into that. All right, so we'll go ahead and I'm going to switch it over to Evan James, and we'll jump right on in.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Amanda, for the introduction, and I'm very happy to speak with you guys today. Just to give you a little background on myself, my name is Evan James. I lead up product marketing here at Skillz. Part of my job, which I really love, is just being able to speak with you guys and empower you with the tools, anything from documentation to general processes to information to help you build a game that is competitive and successful on Skillz. So really excited to jump into some of the content today. I really want to focus on looking at the poll there on how do I help some of you guys understand what is going to work best on the Skillz platform, or just generally whenever you're kind of thinking about creating a competitive mobile game. So getting into everything a little bit, in terms of the agenda, I'm going to walk you through some of the best practices of things to think about when you're developing a game, what you should think about when you're launching a game, and then the post-launch, and making sure that you're kind of getting a game that is up and running and successful and is going to hit your target audience and deliver some content that is really exciting and both retains and engages and hopefully helps monetize the game for you guys. So starting off, before getting into that a little bit, just want to talk a little bit about what kind of makes a competitive sport. A lot of times when people are thinking about a game, they're not necessarily saying, how are we creating a game that is a digital version of what is a sport? At Skillz, a lot of the games that we see are really kind of falling into the esport categorization, and they follow a lot of the same kind of concepts of what is defined within a sport, meaning that you have players that are competing, that it's fair, they're looking to match up in different types of tournaments. All these things are what really kind of, is what happens when you're looking at an offline sport and translates into being a digital sport as well. And a good example of this is when you're looking at golf in particular. So if you think about golf, you definitely have at the top of that funnel there, you have kind of the professional side of things. And in these types of tournaments, you have a limited number of players. They're playing in something like the US Open. And most of the winnings that are coming out of it are brand sponsored. So people, millions of viewers across the world are watching these players compete. They actually still, a funny little anecdote is, in the US Open, there's still an entry fee that is kind of grandfathered in from the old days. So all the players are actually putting in $50. But as you can imagine, they're winning much larger prizes than that. So there's a $9 million prize pool that is split amongst the 156 players. And most of these prizes are coming from sponsors, Lexus, Amex, et cetera. And this is just one example of kind of like the professional side of things. Below that, you have the player-funded side, and these would be sort of, kind of amateur golfers that are wanting to compete in tournaments that have some sort of real prize that they can win. And so most of these tournaments are actually coming from the entry fees of the players themselves. So you have players entering in, they're putting in money into a general prize pool. There are some amount of administration fees that go to making sure that those tournaments actually happen. But then the prizes that the top winners are getting are really coming kind of sourced from other players. So that's in that kind of mid-level. And then at the very bottom, you have the casual competition. So you have people that are going out, like myself, that are probably not the best players in the world, hope to be better at some point, and they're really looking at just paying sort of the green fees. You may have, I often with my friends or with my father will say, like, let's put $10 on this, and it's more of just like a casual competition where you're competing for fun. And you're not typically receiving any sort of prize coming from any sort of organization. And the reason to bring all that up is that's a lot of the same way that you kind of see many of the casual esport tournaments on Skillz working, where you have people that are coming in on the bottom and they're playing for fun. They're competing for virtual currency, bragging rights, all of those sorts. And then you have a little bit of the middle section where you have people that are coming in, they're putting in, entering into either head-to-head or bracketed tournaments. There's an entry fee, and a lot of this, these entry fees are sponsoring the prize takeaways that they're able to get from winning that competition. And then at the very top, you have sort of the brand sponsor, the professional athletes. This is both on Skillz, but you would also see this a lot in terms of, if you were to watch a League of Legends or Dota esport tournament, you're more and more starting to see professional tournaments that are popping up here. So before getting into that, a couple of key things to really think about that are critical when you're developing your game and you're wanting to have a mobile esport of how do you ensure successful competition. There are multiple things to look at, but one of the key things is the importance of fairness. So within any game, you want to make sure that the game is free of fraud. There's fairness so that players of equal skill level are competing against each other, and you're assuring other players that the play is actually fair. So it wouldn't be fun or fair if you had two soccer teams and one team was completely a professional team and was not adhering to any of the rules, and the other team was more of a novice team and was adhering to the rules. Both of those situations create a environment where the game is just not fair. It's not fun for anybody to play a player of a different skill level, and it's also not fun to play somebody if they're cheating. And so one of the key tenets that we have at Skillz is just ensuring that all player match play is fair. We assure players that the gameplay is fair by showing them video replays afterwards to let them know this is actually how the gameplay happened with your opponent. And we have active people that are making sure that our system is free of fraud. The second thing is having the right genre and gameplay. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in depth, but generally speaking, for any competitive game, you need to kind of steer away from luck. If you have a dice game, it's really hard to call it a competition because you're having two players throw a dice, and maybe one will do better than the other, but they're not really able to increase their skills. They're not able to say, I'm a professional dice player. So it's really just about making sure that you have something that's skill-based in your game. And then also on the gameplay, we're going to go into that in depth, but making sure your gameplay is compatible with genre so that you are kind of fulfilling your audience expectations. And then the last thing is making sure that you have sort of cash or virtual currency enabled tournaments. At Skillz, we really are looking at, we have cash matches on our system. those cash matches follow all sorts of geo-based legislation. So in some states, in the majority of states, cash-based or skill-based gaming is enabled, but in some it's not. And we definitely make sure that there's 18 and over age restriction, and that when it comes to determining whether you want to have a cash-based or a virtual currency enabled only game, it's kind of what's in the demand of the audience. So there are some games that are going to perform better for audience types that are just wanting to compete for the thrill of it, and there are other different genres that are going to really be looking at a game where they can compete for cash. And one of the cool things about Skillz in general is that we really provide an ecosystem where we're able to provide mobile esports to help fulfill the 2.6 billion mobile gamers that are out in the space. So there's a ton of people that are looking for new content, looking for games to play, and traditionally a lot of this was focused on kind of the PC or the console side of things. And that's great, and it's still a big, thriving part of the market, but there was an accessibility issue in terms of you had to really be able to have a high-end console or have a high-end PC that would enable for this gameplay to take place. Now, when you look at kind of all the people that have a smartphone in the world, one of the things that's mobile has really shifted is you have just a much wider audience that is able to come in and download, install a game that is suitable to the gameplay that they're looking for, and be able to compete across a wide range of different types of content. And so Skillz is offering kind of the ability for game developers to really tap into this eager market that's looking for new content. And some of the interesting things that we've seen generally is that 40% of people are looking to enter into competition, which means that the market is very large. It also means that it's very diverse in terms of the audience types. So we've seen on our system, we have a very wide range of players in player demographics in terms of age, in terms of socioeconomic background, in terms of location, that are really looking for a number of different types of content. And it's something that we've really seen as kind of a key to success with launching a game with Skillz, is that we're able to have a diverse amount of content in our system that's hitting all different types of player demographics. Another just kind of key thing to understand, I won't spend too much on this, but we have seen generally that competitive gamers are mobile's most engaged and underserved audience. We've seen that sort of multiplayer tournaments that are utilizing an esport model are monetizing up to 6 times better than single-player games. This is due to a number of reasons. One is definitely kind of the thrill of competition that people get when they're competing against another person. And then also it plays into, we represent a new monetization model. So we aren't using in-app purchases or in-app advertising. It's really about having that competitive tournament where players are able to come in and play for either free or for cash-based matches. And one of the cool things about it is we really think it adds to the overall player experience instead of having something where an ad is potentially disrupting the player experience. And so that's one of the reasons why we see also just greater retention on our system, is that it is something that is overall adding to your gameplay. And this is something that is kind of key within developing a game with Skillz. So what are some of the kind of challenges that game developers face when creating an engaging and profitable game? Some of the first things are a little bit of what I was just speaking about previously, the low engagement retention rates with high player acquisition costs. A lot of the struggle when you're launching a game is how do I first kind of retain those early users, making sure that the game is something that is something that the player wants to come back to. It's kind of easy to pick up, but then they are able to see, if I continuously play this game, I'm going to get better at it, and it's going to offer me some sort of reward, psychological reward, so that I want to come back and continuously play that game more and more. And one of the drop-offs that we do see with game developers, especially on mobile, is if there is something that is kind of disrupting that player experience. So again, having ads play at certain points, you may be playing a game and then you're served an ad and you decide, okay, I'm ready to move on to the second thing, whereas if that ad didn't exist, you might continuously play that game. So that's one thing. The other things are, games lacking compelling player motivation. So one of the ways that Skillz goes about this is, really kind of making sure that we have a number of different features that are telling players, if you play this game, we offer trophies. So you undergo a certain number of matches played or cash matches, or you win a certain number of matches in a row, you receive some sort of trophy, which is just motivating the player to get better and better. In addition, we also are offering things such as leaderboards, so the top players can see where do I stack up against all other players within a game, and this is giving them motivation to kind of increase their standing in the leaderboard, both on virtual currency games just for the thrill of it, and on sort of cash-based games so that they're able to receive larger amounts of rewards. High maintenance costs for traditional monetization methods. So this is going back to always making sure to keeping your content fresh. And we've seen in a lot of sort of subscription-based models or in-app purchases, you're continuously needing to offer something that is going to retain those players. If it's a single-player game, especially, if they've explored all the content, how are they going to still look and seek out something that is new? And so this often comes at the cost of expensive, developing and maintaining sort of the technology infrastructure, in addition to spending time and resources on creating, future iterations of a game. And then one of the last things is that it's difficult to ensure fairness and prevent cheating in competitive tournaments. So if you're kind of going in and you're saying, I want to create my own competitive tournament infrastructure, one of the things that you just definitely want to think about is you probably need to build in a lot of different fairness features, in addition to probably having some sort of anti-fraud, anti-cheating team that is really looking at identifying players that are potentially looking to pursue fraudulent activity or looking to cheat on your system, and resolving that. Because if that does exist on your system, for the players that aren't engaging in that, which is the bulk of them, then you're running into something where there's a lack of trust of players playing your game because they aren't sure if they're playing their game against somebody that is cheating, they're playing a game against somebody that is potentially trying to commit fraud. And so Skillz has been just a kind of quick plug here into how we've kind of come about creating a competitive multiplayer tournament system. We offer kind of the head-to-head matching. If you look at that image on the left, that is actually one of the ways that we are ensuring that players understand that our system is fair. So after every match played, a player has the option of watching a video replay where they can see both myself playing against and also the player that I played against before that. That lets them know, okay, A, I'm not playing against an AI, and B, this is how my score took place. So I was able to score, I don't know, I think this is a pool game, so I was able to shoot all the balls in a certain amount of time, and that meant that I beat my competitor because they took a longer amount of time. Some of the key things to just know about Skillz, it's really it's a SDK that is easy to download and integrate, that sets you up with everything that you need to have competitive multiplayer tournaments. A full list of features go into it, everything that is kind of focused on how do you increase engagement, retention, and importantly monetization of your game. So everything from head-to-head tournaments, bracketed tournaments, leaderboards, trophies, a ticket store to retain players. There's a really kind of wide range of different features that we're offering through this integration. And this is really to help you maximize existing monetization. So one of the things that we've kind of seen a lot of our game developers do is they already have a game that could be a competitive multiplayer game, and so they create a separate SKU. They want to maintain their existing game. They want to make sure they're using a different monetization method. And we aren't necessarily saying, scrap that and come to us. We're saying break off a piece of that content or create a Skillz-powered version of the game and let it represent a new revenue stream for you. And so we've seen a wide range of our game developers doing that, where it's just additionally adding on more revenue to your existing revenue. Also, if you want to launch a brand new game with Skillz, we have a number of developers that are doing that as well. And then the last thing is that we eliminate fraud and ensure fairness. So we have a large anti-fraud team that is going through consistently and trying to identify players that are potentially trying to commit fraud. We are then looking at how do we identify that, how do we resolve that, and how do we make sure that they're off our system and that there is no fraud on the system. And the second thing is just ensuring fairness. We do this through a number of different ways. One is all of our games that are cash-enabled must be skill-based, more than 65% skill-based. We have a patent algorithm that ensures that that's happening. We also have a patent algorithm that ensures that any sort of random act within a game is the same random act from one player to another, so it's kind of taking that element of chance out of it. And then also making sure that we're doing things like providing the video replays so players can see that they're playing against a real live player and that the game is nobody is cheating on the game. Awesome. So in terms of the three kind of keys to driving a successful competitive mobile game, we're going to go into each of these, but the first is genre, making sure that you have a genre that is well set up within the competitive mobile game ecosystem, but especially really thinking about that genre in terms of audience and, is this genre going to hit the right type of player that I want to have on my game? And that also kind of ties into gameplay of, is my gameplay set up well for a competitive tournament? Is the gameplay set up well for the genre? And also, is the gameplay set up well for the audience? So these things are kind of interconnected. We're going to go through them one by one, but generally speaking, I would say, these are things that you need to pay attention to, but you shouldn't think of as silos. It's really about thinking of them as three interconnected things that you should be thinking about at all time. Everything from ideation to designing your GDD to really, kind of starting developing and designing and iterating and launching your game. Really thinking about these kind of three key things as the tenets to a successful competitive mobile game is critical. So starting with genre, honestly, we have a really wide range of genres on our system. So it's a little bit of a trick question. It doesn't really matter as much of like what genre do I have or what genre is my game, but more does your kind of gameplay match audience expectations for that game genre. So if you have a bubble shooter and you're trying to attract a bubble shooter player demographic, if you randomly have some other element to your gameplay where you have a first-person shooter, some sort of like additional piece of content that is randomly popping it into that bubble shooter game, it's probably not going to match your audience expectations. And so you just want to really kind of think about when you're developing the game, is my gameplay matching what a player of a particular genre is really looking for? So really kind of honing in on that audience and matching that gameplay to that. And then another thing within, kind of whenever it comes to any bit of developing a game is you want to think about, how does my game stand out? So, in product marketing, I'm constantly thinking of generally how does my product stand out against all the other products within a space. It's the same thing when you're looking at it from a game perspective. Most genres at this point players have a wide variety of choices of which game they want to choose from. So what is it that your gameplay is offering that is different, that is going to really like bring you to the top of the ranks? Is it some sort of really cool slick UI? Is it a particular new aspect of a game of gameplay within that genre, just really kind of thinking of like what is your kind of value differentiator against other games within that system, and really honing in on that, and then being able to market it in a way that is going to attract players. And then if you have that kind of unique piece of content, then most likely they'll be retained. The second thing is on gameplay. So one of the things that we've really seen works well is sort of obviously first making sure that it's a fun gameplay. I was looking at a game the other day, not on the Skillz system, but it was something that I honestly found just extremely stressful. I didn't have any bit of hitting my dopamine receptor of like I'm having a lot of fun. It was just something where like my heart rate went up, and I felt like I don't want to do this anymore. So making sure that you're having something that's definitely, increasing the heart rate of your players is something that could be good, but you want to do it in a way where they're having fun, because people are coming to play games to have fun. So obviously ensuring that. The second play on, is it quick? This is something that I would say, especially if you're focused on competitive tournaments, is kind of key for all your performance metrics and your monetization. You want to have something that is fun to play, but is not going to take an extreme long amount of time. Generally, I don't want to give you a hard amount of time of what works best with Skillz, but somewhere in the range of 2 to 6 minutes is usually, and some games are even a little bit shorter than that, are usually the games that we see the highest performance rates. So if you have a longer game, that doesn't mean we're suggesting that you should scrap it down to its bare bones, but we're saying for having a Skillz-powered version, maybe breaking off a piece of that game and creating a version of the game that is just highly competitive and something that the players can really get into. Is your game skill-based? Again, for any game that's going to be cash-enabled on the Skillz system, it needs to be skill-based. And that, is it engaging? Is it competitive? Is it something that players really want to come back to over and over again, compete at, and beat other players and get better at in general? And that leads to point 3. Generally, you don't want to confuse your sort of new players. You don't want them to come into the system and think, oh man, I really suck at this game and I'm never going to get better, and how can I possibly compete at it, or I'm confused. So you want to make the gameplay something where new players come in and they think, oh, that was fun and I didn't do all that bad and I would like to get better at that game. So offering something that is going to really retain and engage those new players. But then the difficult to master part is if a player feels like they kind of mastered the game already, then they feel like they completed the game, and they're most likely going to move on to a new piece of content. So making sure that your game also has something where you're able to really get better at the game and get better and increase your skill level, so that really the best practice and best performing players are the ones that are consistently winning the matches, and that they're coming back for it over time and wanting to continuously compete. A good example of this that I like to use is chess. If you think about that, the gameplay has always been the same over hundreds and hundreds of years, but it is a game that new players can come in and play against each other, and it will be fun. But also, you have to really, really, really practice and play a lot to ever truly master the game. And there's only a certain number of grand chess masters out in the world. And then the unique quality, best in class, we've talked about a little bit. And then the last kind of key thing that I think a lot of game developers really want to focus in on it early. So really, when you're in that game ideation kind of phase of developing your game, is who is your audience? So who is the audience that you want to attract, and then focusing on like, okay, what is the gameplay, what is the genre that's really going to attract this audience? Or maybe you have a game already and you're like, I have this game, but I don't know who's going to play it. I would highly recommend doing some testing, figuring out what is my player demographic, and going about getting that. Generally speaking, you can have the best game in the world, but you need to figure out a way to get players through that. So ensuring that you know who that audience is key for that. And then really implementing a UA strategy that is going to drive success. So, you've done your audience you know who your audience demographic is. Now develop a UA strategy that's going to use the right targeting and perform the best for attracting those players into the system. Other things to think about is cross-promotion traffic and option. We see this a lot with games that have an existing SKU, but then they want to build out a Skillz-powered version of the game. How do they take some of the most competitive players on that main SKU and run cross-promo to drive them to the Skillz-powered version? And just kind of thinking about it from that perspective. Generally, at Skillz, we have kind of a number of different requirements that are on our developer console for becoming cache-enabled. But one of the key ones is that you need to have 100 7-day recurring DAU. So you want to understand, how am I going to get that sort of early player adoption so that I can if you're thinking of launching a Skillz game, how can I get that early player adoption to hit that 100 DAU threshold so that I can move into becoming cache-enabled and really start to monetize on my game. And then a point to that is, are your players in cache-enabled regions? Generally, if you're focused on the U.S., there's 32 different states that are cache-enabled, I believe, at the moment. And then in terms of countries, there are countries that have cache-enabled and countries that are not. And it's just understanding sort of where your audience type is. If you want to look into which countries are cache-enabled and which countries are not, we have documentation on the developer console. Cool. So those are like the 3 steps or the 3 different pillars, I would say, to thinking about really creating a competitive mobile game. Hope that was definitely helpful. And if you are now thinking about, well, what are the steps for integrating a game with Skillz? On the left-hand side, you can see the link to our developer console or developers page. That's a good place to go. Get a little bit more information on what Skillz is offering, and then it's also the place where you can create an account and log into our developer console. Our developer console is where you would download the SDK, you would integrate the SDK, you would go through all the steps of setting up tournaments, setting up push notifications, setting up sort of your Apple Pay, your payment systems, all those things that are going to help you get to a place where you have a full Skillz-powered game, you're ready to go live, you're ready to drive that early player acquisition, and then hopefully move on to becoming cache-enabled. We have tons of great documentation, whether you're a iOS, Unity, or Android developer, so everything that you need to kind of take that step-by-step walkthrough. You can also post on our developer forum for a number of different resources and speak with other game developers there. So we want to make sure that you have all the things that you need to be able to get live with the Skillz-powered game as seamlessly as possible. Generally, the integration setup, some of the things that we just recommend is that you trim down your game, so you remove any sort of unnecessary features. You set up game parameters using the SDK for scoring elements. So a good example of this is, if you have a golf game, you want to set up scoring that is it's definitely based on lower score wins, but it could also have a time element to it. And then if it's, I don't know, a first-person shooter, it's more of something of like, if I do this particular action, or I have this many kills, or whatever it is, I'm scored this way or this way, and basically the highest score wins. A key thing on a side note of, on our scoring in general is always making sure that you have a scoring screen that is explaining to players exactly how they were scored in the past match. That goes back to one of the things of easy to learn. So you're showing them, okay, you perform these actions, and therefore you hit this score. Now, if you want to get better at the game, here's how you get better. And it's a good kind of like guide, I would say, to having players understand how to get better at the game. Just like if you're launching a game with Skillz or with anybody else testing and tuning your game, fine-tuning it is always key. making iterations so that you have the slickest, most engaging, most fun game that you can possibly have. And then a couple other things, again, on the sort of tutorial side of things. For new players that are coming in, if you just throw them into the gameplay, they're probably not going to know what to do, and they're not going to have so much fun. So providing a short but very explanatory tutorial of, okay, this is how you play the game is something that we see is key to kind of the integration process. Fairness testing, as generally I mentioned earlier, you can see on the image on the right, it's not really fun if you have two people playing at vastly different skill levels. So that's one of the reasons we have player matchmaking to kind of take care of that for you. So we have players of equal skill levels competing against each other. You don't have a new player, which would be the image on the top, coming in and playing a professional. It's more like the image on the bottom of having two players of equal skill level. And this is just something that we've seen is really, really key for that player engagement, player retention, and monetization. Second thing is if your game isn't fair, it won't be eligible for cash enablement. So this is really about making sure that you have a fair game, also that it's skill-based, so that you can really hone in on sort of our monetization system. If it is not that, we still offer the SDK, but you would have to be looking at other ways to monetize your game. And then we have a fairness testing tool that allows you, when you're going through the integration process, to basically test and verify your game's fairness. So just making sure that you're taking that seriously and looking at it. And then the last point I've talked to, that we keep track of live games to make sure they're fair using the Skillz fairness algorithm, again, patent algorithm that we definitely employ to make sure that all games on our system are fair. Tournaments, some of the things to just think about with tournaments is, there's kind of a default setup of different types of tournaments that have different entry fees and prizes, and you just want to make sure that the game parameter configurations are consistent across each tournament entry fee, and that you have the right types of tournaments for your game. So making sure that if it's something that works well with a bracketed tournament, that's enabled. If it's something where you would just rather have head-to-head, just focusing on that. One thing to note is that, again, cash tournaments, once you go live, just be cognizant of the fact that cash tournaments aren't going to be enabled initially upon launch. It's really about driving sort of that early player acquisition so that you get to that 100 DAO threshold and you hit a number of different sort of requirements to make sure that you do become cash enabled. And then going live, a couple that actually jumping down to point 3 there, something that I really want to point out that is kind of key to going live is really focusing on that, making sure that push notifications, Apple Pay, and SSO are all working. These are really just key for a number of different reasons, but starting with push notifications, that's how you're going to retain your players the best. So making sure that if a player jumps out, that they're receiving push notifications to know them that maybe a tournament has ended, they want to see the results, that they're jumping back into it, or there's some sort of live event that they should enter for a certain prize. It's just one of the key things that we have to use, or that we help game developers leverage to retain players. And then also Apple Pay is another key one just on the monetization side of things. And single sign-on is something that will allow new players to come to your game from Skillz, so they aren't hitting a screen and having to re-sign up. We want to make sure all of our Skillz players have a very easy sign-up from one game to another, and this is a good way of getting players from other games to come to you. But other things to think about, we have custom themes. We highly recommend you finding a theme that is right to your game, so making sure that it's in line with everything that you want from a UI visual perspective. And then other things are finalizing your tournament names and parameters. So we provide kind of general tournament names, but we do recommend, if you so want to customize it based on the gameplay. So you can name it kind of whatever fits well within your gameplay. and then compiling production, building and uploading it, compressing the files, making sure it's something that's reasonable so that the install rate isn't, or the install time isn't too long. And then once it's on production, reviewing the tutorial, change your name, change your profile pic, and play a few matches just to make sure that everything is looking right. And then if you do a targeted soft launch, we recommend picking an audience similar to your main audience. That's if you have a kind of existing game or actually a new Skillz-powered version only, and just trying to hone in on who, again, going back to that audience typing, trying to run testing on people that you think are going to be a part of your hard launch is going to be show you the best results as possible. You want to test on people that you think will eventually be playing this game, not on let me test with all my coworkers around me, or just somebody that isn't going to be your end-all player demographic. Post-launch, key thing to think about is sort of user acquisition isn't just a number of installs, it's a number of installs within a certain time interval. So this is making sure that your UA campaigns are up and running and getting new players in a quick way, and that generally, again, going back to the cache-enabled kind of thing, we need a certain DAO to be able to really match players, and that matching of players goes into making sure that you're cache-enabled. Fine-tuning your tournaments and making sure that you don't break fairness anytime that you do a game iteration. So you don't want to create some sort of game-breaking change to your gameplay that then you've built up a certain amount of DAO, but then the game isn't working. You want to make sure all your iterations are running in a way that doesn't affect the player experience of players that are already on your game. And then making sure that you're doing live updates and feature changes before your game reaches that ultimate level of success. One of the really cool things we've seen about Skillz games in general is that they retain for a very long amount of time. So we have players that have been playing the same game for years, and so we like to try and see the game iterations kind of early in the game life cycle, so that once you have a game that's really truly ready to go, flawless, and you want to really ramp up that UA, that the players are going to not then experience some major iteration in terms of the gameplay, that you've kind of made those iterations early on. One thing to notice is some of the Skillz features aren't enabled until you reach certain milestones. We have a very sort of methodical way of turning on certain features that are going to help you over time. Some of the features that we turn on at different kind of DAO thresholds, other sort of performance requirements, are to help you understand, okay, this is going to be something that's going to help increase player engagement. This feature helps increase player retention. This one is going to help you monetize better. But generally, if we turn those features on too early, then it's something that actually hurts the overall performance. So we have a way of kind of scaling up our features with your game as your game becomes more performant over time. Cool, and that's a little bit of everything with in terms of what we're talking about. Generally, one of our kind of indie studios that we like to talk about is Tether Studios. They came in early on with us and launched a number of different games. They have seen, I can't remember exactly the number of titles they have on Skillz, but they've built kind of a whole business around launching Skillz games. They've gone from a team of 2 to around a team of 20. And they've seen great sort of stats in terms of a 68 increase in ARPDAU, and they were just seeing, 68 cents now. They were seeing 2 cents through ads before Skillz implementation. They've seen very strong D1, D7, D30 retention rates. So generally, this is kind of just showing the success of an indie game developer coming onto our system, launching a Skillz game, and then being able to really kind of fine-tune and hone what is that content that's really going to work well with Skillz, and they're continuously producing stuff as of now. Awesome. So going to take just a quick poll here. We won't take quite as long, but if you would like to fill in, would you like to learn more about how Skillz can help monetize my game, please go ahead and fill that in, and we'll move on to a Q&A shortly. right, looks like responses are coming in, and the overwhelming majority are interested in learning about how Skillz can help monetize my game. We'll definitely We'll follow up on this webinar in terms of making sure to provide you all this content, but also staying in contact with you throughout everything to provide you kind of information on the top Skillz features. I also highly recommend checking out our blog. That's a great place for understanding a wide variety of different resources in terms of everything from designing your game to launching your game to just general best practices of game development, a number of different topics there. And also checking out our developers page and our developer console, and that'll really help give you a better understanding of what it means to go live with the game and how to do so. So there are a number of different resources there that are at your fingertips, and we'll also follow up. All right, cool. So I think we're going to take some questions.
Yeah, we'll open it up for the rest of the time for Q&A. Thank you so much, Evan, on sharing your expertise on that topic. Looks like the first question that we have here is, does Skillz help developers with distribution as well? For example, does Skillz provide any kind of promotion discovery for developers?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a frequently asked question. And the answer is in some ways yes, and in some ways no. So we're not necessarily saying that you're going to launch a Skillz-powered game and your work is done, and all of a sudden players are going to come, magically to your game, and they're going to play. There does need to be some amounts of marketing on your side. So we have a number of different resources. Again, if you check out the blog or you check out the name of the webinar is how to drive player acquisition on a shoestring budget, is a great resource for looking into how do you do some kind of scrappy UA or running other types of marketing programs, whether it's organic, social, doing some sort of guerrilla marketing, cross promo, something to drive some adoption is useful. But in terms of us and how we kind of promote our games, we do see 24% of Skillz players jumping from one game to another. So there is games.skillz.com has all of our cache-enabled games. We're hoping that all of you guys get onto that eventually, and being able to really then tap into the Skillz ecosystem. And then again, we're turning on different features as your game moves in performance over time that allows for players to come find and discover your games. So if you hit certain DAO thresholds, we'll write a blog about you, and you'll potentially have a press release at higher DAO thresholds. We're working on ways to generally help increase your distribution, and yeah.
Awesome. All right. So someone on the webinar today is building a new game with Skillz already. So could you explain a little bit more detail about the requirements that are to be cache-enabled, such as the 100 DAO requirement?
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely, for whoever that person is that's looking into it, if you go into the documentation and I think you can just even do in the search bar cache-enabled requirements. There's like 6 or 7 of them. The top ones, I would say 100 DAO threshold, that's key. It has to pass our fairness test, so it needs to be, our skill-based game test, so it needs to be, again, free of, or more skill-based than chance. So making sure that everything is kind of is lined up on the skill-based front. That there are not tons of negative reviews in the App Store, that you're performing well generally. From that, we want to associate games that are performing positively amongst our player base. And a key thing, and actually I was at GDC last week, and one of the key things that you really see that hurts games is if there are bugs in the game, if there are crashes, the UI isn't up to par. So making sure that all those things are happening, whether you're launching a game with Skillz or elsewhere, that you're bug-free, you're not having players crash out of the app, and that's kind of another key requirement that we have for any game that's going to be cache enabled.
Great, yeah, that's super helpful. So another question that just came in: how are the tournament dollar amounts determined for these game developers?
Great question. Tournament dollar amounts. So again, there's only virtual currency games until you hit that cache enabled threshold, which again, trying to get to the 100 DAO threshold. After that, the way that we've seen the best performance by far for you guys is that we enable different tournament amounts based on the amount of cash DAO that is in your game. So for instance, we have on some of our high DAO titles, we'll have games where players can come in and they have entry fees of I think the highest one is like $300 with the ability to win $500. We wouldn't want to do that, and you wouldn't want to enable that right off the bat because you simply just wouldn't have any players that are entering into it, and then it would be difficult to retain. If you did get a player that came in and entered that, it would be difficult to retain that player because they would never get matched. There probably just aren't that many players that are looking to compete at those high rates, those high entry fees. So essentially, long story short, we come in lower, so we have a 60 cent for $1 entry fee, head-to-head one. We have a 3 for $5. Some of our games will even go lower. There's only a few where it's like a 25-cent entry fee and for 60 cents, 25 cents for 40 cents. So generally, it's going to start on that lower end of the spectrum, and then as you build your game's success over time, you'll see more and more higher cash-based tournaments enabled.
Great. All right, let's see here. So could you highlight a few examples of games and or genres that are working well with Skillz?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have I'm happy to highlight a number of different types of games that are working well, but want to be very cognizant of the fact that a lot of different genres and games are working well with Skillz. So we have, currently some of our top games include card games, puzzle games, match threes, trivia games, sports games. So we have a really successful bowling game, for instance, or a basketball game. But we also have, kind of new games that are coming in terms of racing games, first-person shooter. It's an arcade. The genre isn't something that we're too focused on in terms of like this genre works well. It's really more about the gameplay. So having those games that are competitive in nature, they're relatively short and they're fun. That's really kind of the key for figuring out what kind of game works well with Skillz.
Yeah, that's great. So does Skillz have demographic data on players that compete in Skillz Cash and virtual currency tournaments?
Yes. That is not something that we can necessarily speak about too much in terms of our own player demographic, but some of the broad strokes of what I can say is that we have a very wide range of player demographic data, of player demographics on our system. So we have young, old, rural, urban, all sorts of socioeconomic backgrounds, demographics. What I would say, if you're trying to hone in on who's going to be the hottest audience, I would say it's really more about thinking of your game and the genre that you fit in and knowing what type of player fits with that game. So a certain type of player is going to play a bridge game, a different type of player is going to play a chess game, a different type of player is going to play a bubble shooter game. So it's not really as much on who's the overall Skillz player demographic, but more of who is the player demographic of that particular genre and that particular game.
Okay. And yeah, I know you definitely can't speak about that player demographic too much, but are you able to tell the audience they're wondering about which region most players on the Skillz platform are from?
In terms of where Skillz players are from, that is an excellent question. I would say, most are in the U.S., and I'm like pretty confident on that one. In terms of like the actual, state by state breakdown, I would have to look into it. I know last year, I believe that we did some sort of audience heat map where it looked at where all of our players were from, and we distributed it. I can follow up on that one. I just don't have an easy breakdown of state by state. Here's where everybody is.
Okay, great. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there for our Q&A. But thank you, Evan, for answering all of those questions. But I'd also like to thank our audience today for engaging with our presentation today. It's always great to interact with everyone on these webinars, and we hope that you got some helpful information through this session. And if you'd like to learn more, please visit us at developers.skillz.com or send us an email at launch@skillzdev.com. Thank you again for your time, and remember that we'll be sending out a link in a follow-up email for this webinar. So if there's anything you didn't quite catch or want to review, we'll be sure to send that to you as a resource. All right, well, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to come out, and hope to see you on the next webinar.
All right, bye.